Okay, so we're going. It's going, right? Okay, well, hail audience. I'm Pannobhasa, also known as David Reynolds. And this is the second installment of the new experimental forest readings series, where I go out into a scenic forest area like this and read some of my favorite Buddhist texts, so that people that are too busy to read can just listen to me read for you. I read so that you don't have to. So the first one I did was the Sin Sing Ming, which was Mahayana Buddhist. But this one is Theravada. This is just like strict, mainstream, orthodox Theravada Buddhism from the Majjhima Nikaya. And usually when I do translations in Theravada Buddhism, I'll translate it myself, but I've never done a translation of the entire sutta that I'm going to read. So I'm relying on Venerable Nyanamoli and Bhikkhu Bodhi's version of the Majjhima Nikaya, which is excellent translation. I couldn't really translate it better than they have already translated it anyway. So with all due respect to Bhikkhu Bodhi and Venerable Nyanavira, both of them were excellent translators, even though Bhikkhu Bodhi's politics are kind of questionable sometimes. But so the discourse I'm going to read is one of my favorites from the Majjhima Nikaya, and it is the Cūlasuññata Sutta, which is the shorter discourse on voidness, going with Nyanamoli's and Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. And it's the first sutta in the division on voidness, the Suññata Vagga. And another translation of Suññata is emptiness. So it could be the lesser discourse on emptiness, the smaller discourse on voidness, anything along those lines. And there's one part that I'm going to kind of skip over, or kind of condense it down, because those of you familiar with Pali texts know that they were designed to be memorized, and so they're very repetitive. You'll have like the same paragraph over and over again with just like one or two words different, which is trying to the patience of Westerners that don't really have time to sit down and read a book anyway. So when I get into the formless jhanas, I'll probably skip over a couple of them and just let you know what I'm doing, just to save some time, because the new information is just a few words contained in entire paragraphs. So without any further ado, the shorter discourse on voidness, translated by Nyanamoli and Bhikkhu Bodhi. Thus have I heard, on one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Sawati in the Eastern Park, in the palace of Migara's mother. Then, when it was evening, the Venerable Ananda rose from meditation, went to the Blessed One, and after paying homage to him, he sat down at one side and said to the Blessed One, Venerable Sir, on one occasion the Blessed One was living in the Sakyan country, at a town of the Sakyans named Nagarika. There, Venerable Sir, I heard and learned this from the Blessed One's own lips. Now, Ananda, I often abide in voidness. Did I hear that correctly, Venerable Sir? Did I learn that correctly? Attend to that correctly? Remember that correctly? And then the Buddha answers, certainly, Ananda, you heard that correctly, learned that correctly, attended to that correctly, remembered that correctly. As formerly, Ananda, so now, too, I often abide in voidness. Ananda, just as this palace of Migara's mother is void of elephants, cattle, horses, and mares, void of gold and silver, void of the assembly of men and women, and there is present only this non-voidness, namely the singleness dependent on the sangha of bhikkhus, so too a bhikkhu, not attending to the perception of village, not attending to the perception of people, attends to the singleness dependent on the perception of forest. His mind enters into that perception of forest and acquires confidence, steadiness, and decision. He understands thus, whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of village, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of people, those are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, namely, the singleness dependent on the perception of forest. He understands This field of perception is void of the perception of village. This field of perception is void of the perception of people. There is present only this non-voidness, namely, the singleness dependent on the perception of forest. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there, but as to what remains there, he understands that which is present thus. This is present. Thus, Ananda, this is his genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness. Again, Ananda, a bhikkhu, not attending to the perception of people, not attending to the perception of forest, attends to the singleness dependent on the perception of earth. His mind enters into that perception of earth and acquires confidence, steadiness, and decision, just as a bull's hide becomes free from folds when fully stretched with 100 pegs. So too a bhikkhu, not attending to any of the ridges and hollows of this earth, to the rivers and ravines, the tracts of stumps and thorns, the mountains and uneven places, attends to the singleness dependent on the perception of earth. His mind enters into that perception of earth and acquires confidence, steadiness, and decision. He understands thus, whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of people, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of forest, those are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of earth. He understands this field of perception is void of the perception of people. This field of perception is void of the perception of forest. There is present only this non-voidness, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of earth. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there, but as to what remains there, he understands that which is present thus. This is present. Thus, Ananda, this too is his genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness. Again, Ananda, a bhikkhu, not attending to the perception of forest, not attending to the perception of earth, attends to the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of infinite space. His mind enters into that perception of the base of infinite space and acquires confidence, steadiness, and decision. He understands thus, whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of forest, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of earth, those are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, namely, the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of infinite space. He understands this field of perception is void of the perception of forest. This field of perception is void of the perception of earth. There is present only this non-voidness, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of infinite space. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there, but as to what remains there, he understands that which is present thus. This is present. Thus, Ananda, this too is his genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness. And I'll stop here just for a few minutes to explain what we've read thus far. And when it's talking about earth, he's meditating on earth. That is earth kasina. It's a kind of meditation technique where you're meditating on one of the four elements. And in this case, it's the element of patui, or earth. And the assumption is he's going through all four jhanas, all four levels of contemplation of form based on the element of earth, although it could be based on other things, including just the breathing. It's just chosen to be earth for convenience in the sutta. And the perception of infinite space is the first formless jhana. So the next formless jhana is infinite space, and then nothingness, and then I'll just pick it up on the fourth of the formless jhanas. So let's see here. Again, Ananda, a bhikkhu, not attending to the perception of the base of infinite consciousness, not attending to the perception of the base of nothingness, attends to the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception. His mind enters into that perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception and acquires confidence, steadiness, and decision. He understands thus, whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of the base of infinite consciousness, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of the base of nothingness, those are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, namely, the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception. He understands this field of perception is void of the perception of the base of infinite consciousness. This field of perception is void of the perception of the base of nothingness. there is present only this non-voidness, namely, the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there, but as to what remains there he understands that which is present, thus, this is present. Thus, Ananda, this too is his genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness. Again, Ananda, a bhikkhu, not attending to the perception of the base of nothingness, not attending to the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception, attends to the singleness dependent on the signless concentration of mind, which is animeta ceto samadhi in Pali. His mind enters into that signless concentration of mind and acquires confidence, steadiness, and decision. He understands thus, whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of the base of nothingness, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception, those are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, namely that connected with the 6 bases that are dependent on this body and conditioned by life. He understands this field of perception is void of the perception of the base of nothingness. This field of perception is void of the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception. There is present only this non-voidness, namely, that connected with the 6 bases that are dependent on the body and conditioned by life. And the 6 bases are the 6 sense organs, which includes mind. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there, but as to what remains there, he understands that which is present thus. This is present. Thus, Ananda, this too is his genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness. Again, Ananda, a bhikkhu, not attending to the perception of the base of nothingness, not attending to the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception, attends to the singleness dependent on the signless concentration of mind. His mind enters into that signless concentration of mind and acquires confidence, steadiness, and decision. He understands thus, this signless concentration of mind is conditioned and volitionally produced. But whatever is conditioned and volitionally produced is impermanent, subject to cessation. When he knows and sees thus, his mind is liberated from the taint of sensual desire, from the taint of being, and from the taint of ignorance. When it is liberated, there comes the knowledge, it is liberated. He understands, birth is destroyed, the holy life has been lived. What has to be done has been done. There is no more coming to any state of being. He understands thus, whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the taint of sensual desire, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the taint of being, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the taint of ignorance, those are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, namely, that connected with the 6 bases that are dependent on this body and conditioned by life. He understands this field of perception is void of the taint of sensual desire. This field of perception is void of the taint of being. This field of perception is void of the taint of ignorance. There is present only this non-voidness, namely, that connected with the 6 bases that are dependent on this body and conditioned by life. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there, but as to what remains there, he understands that which is present thus. This is present. Thus, Ananda, this is his genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness, supreme and unsurpassed. Ananda, whatever recluses and Brahmins in the past entered upon and abided in pure, supreme, unsurpassed voidness, all entered upon and abided in this same pure, supreme, unsurpassed voidness. Whatever recluses and Brahmins in the future will enter upon and abide in pure, supreme, unsurpassed voidness, all will enter upon and abide in this same pure, supreme, unsurpassed voidness. Whatever recluses and Brahmins in the present enter upon and abide in pure, supreme, unsurpassed voidness, all enter upon and abide in this same pure, supreme, unsurpassed voidness. Therefore, Ananda, you should train thus. We will enter upon and abide in pure, supreme, unsurpassed voidness. That is what the Blessed One said. The Venerable Ananda was satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. And that is the end of the sutta, but I suppose I should explain some things. I've already stopped and explained a few things, but essentially what this entire sutta is about is the cultivation of emptiness. And it became a big deal in Mahayana Buddhism with the concept of Sūññata, or just emptiness in general. Like Nagarjuna talks a lot about voidness. In fact, he equates dependent core rising with voidness and non-self with voidness. But in Theravada, Here it's talking about the cultivation of emptiness in the sense of emptiness of samsara, just trying to surpass or break through samsara to get to the ultimate reality on the other side. And that ultimate reality on the other side is formless, and so it's going to be void or empty, at least to a perceiving mind. So the first thing he does, the monk who is trying to cultivate like absolute voidness, trying to absolutely transcend samsara, he goes out into a forest where you've got less commotion, less artificiality, pretty much zero artificiality other than what he brings with him. And, no straight lines, no right angles, just everything is natural. And that is empty, at least, of just the artificial crud that human beings create for themselves. And so he's down to just like the laws of nature. And then from there, he starts meditating. And as I said in the sutta, he's meditating on earth elements, although you could meditate on the breath or wind, fire, water. There's all these different things you can meditate on. But just for the sake of an example, in the sutta, he's meditating on earth. And then he goes through all the 4 jhanas, and then he starts getting into the formless jhanas, which could be an anachronism, because the formless jhanas, there is evidence that it was a concept that was added on a little later in the development of Buddhism. But this giving it the benefit of the doubt, he goes through the 4 stages of the formless jhanas and is getting into more and more subtle states. So that's what he's doing, is each state he cultivates is more formless and empty than the one before. It's more subtle, has less perceptual content, no moving parts. It's just getting more and more refined until finally he goes beyond the concept of nothingness, which is still a concept. It's not real nothingness. It's just the idea of nothingness, which is still an idea. And then he goes to the next stage after that, which is the realm of neither perception nor non-perception, which is a meditative state so subtle that you can't really even tell whether you're perceiving anything. And then this is kind of an unusual sutta in that the next stage is the signless concentration of mind, which is probably the same as Nirodha Samapatti, or the attainment of cessation. So it's a state of just pretty much blankness. It's just, there's no perception at all. So that is taken as the most refined mental state that a human being can cultivate. It's like the highest possible meditative state. And then he has liberating insight. It all leads up to this one statement where he's saying, this silence concentration of mind is conditioned and volitionally produced, but whatever is conditioned and volitionally produced is impermanent, subject to cessation. So what happens is he gets to the highest possible meditative state you can get to, and then he realizes that even that isn't nirvana. Even that isn't the highest state, because the highest state isn't going to have a beginning and an end. It's not going to be volitionally produced. You're not going to be able to just sit down and produce it, because if you can sit down and produce it, then it's conditioned and it's not nirvana. So I like this sutta a lot, partly because it shows how jhana and insight combine together, how in all likelihood it wasn't 2 separate paths where you either choose you're gonna focus on samadhi and concentration and develop these jhana states, or on the other hand you're going to concentrate on insight. And really the two go together. And even like 4th jhana is defined as purity of mindfulness. And one other thing, Bhikkhu Bodhi translates as taints. The Pali word is asawa, which literally means like influx or influence. It's something that flows towards you. And I've read, I think it was Ajahn Thanisaro says that the Buddhists borrowed the term asava from the Jains. And the Jains had this idea that your karma it's like a material substance that flows inward into you and like sticks to your soul, and then it weighs you down so that you can't float up into heaven, or at least your jiva or your soul can't float up into heaven. And the Buddhists, of course, borrowed the term and redefined it. And there's all these weird weird definitions or weird renderings, like Bhikkhu Bodhi prefers taint. Some canker is another one that gets used a lot. I think in Nyanaponicka's Buddhist dictionary he used bias, which I think is a good one. But considering that it literally means like influx or influence, I've tended to render it encumbering influence, because it's an influence, it's something that comes from outside, and you take it up, and then it kind of burdens you and stops you from becoming enlightened, or prevents you from becoming enlightened. And sometimes there's a list of 4, but in this one there's a list of 3, which is, let's see, the taint of sensual desire, the taint of being, and the taint of ignorance. So sensual desire is self-explanatory, just greed for goodies, I suppose, greed for pleasure. And the taint of being, the encumbering influence of being, being is often like a synonym for karma. So it's just the momentum of your mind. It's like the momentum of being. It's the momentum of your karma that keeps you in existence. So that's another one of the encumbering influences. And the third is ignorance. So ignorance is kind of self-explanatory, and also it's kind of, you can't really understand it, because to the extent that you understand it, it's not ignorance anymore. So that's one of my favorite suttas, especially in the Majjhima Nikaya. It's probably one of my 2 favorite suttas in the Majjhima Nikaya. And the thing I like about it, first of all, is I like forests, and I like the cultivation of emptiness. It is a mystical text, this sutta. I mean, because the cultivation of emptiness is essentially mysticism. You're trying to still the mind so that you're not distracted by all the perceptions that your mind is generating, all these symbolic perceptions. And so you can, by not being distracted by the stuff that your mind is conjuring up, you're able to penetrate through that and see ultimate reality that is always there beyond it. But you can't really grasp it, because once you grasp it, then it's not ultimate reality anymore. You've just turned it into another perception or another idea, something along those lines. So when you realize that no matter what you do, it's not going to get you enlightened. No matter what you do, you're not going to be able to cultivate nirvana, because nirvana can't be cultivated, because nirvana has no beginning and no end. It has no conditions to it. It has no cause and no effect. So you can't cause nirvana. And so somehow you get to this point where you get to the highest possible state, and even that you realize isn't it. And so it's like when you realize that absolutely nothing you can do is going to produce nirvana, it's not going to produce like a direct awareness of ultimate reality, then something just snaps or breaks or gives up. And then you just, all the efforts, all the trying, all the perceiving and stuff just kind of stops. It comes to a screeching halt. Sort of like Zen monks when they're working on a koan, trying to answer a riddle that has no answer, that it just kind of causes their thinking mind to just stop. And then it's like reality just shines through, because the thinking mind isn't like messing things up by conjuring up these ideas and perceptions and symbols and stuff anymore. So in a way, that's like what Buddhist practice is ultimately about. It's not really stress relief or feeling good about yourself or anything like that, even though it can be used for that. It can be used just for entirely worldly, pragmatic purposes. Like some companies will have their employees meditate just because it increases productivity and causes them to have less sick time, that kind of thing. But ultimately, the purpose of Buddhism, or of any really advanced yogic system, is to make your mind clear enough and uncluttered enough that you're not distracted by all the junk that's being conjured up or generated in your mind, so that you can just see the ultimate reality that shines through. And then once you've done that, then the trick is to keep seeing the ultimate reality that shines through, even after your mind starts making noise and you start walking around and doing things again. So that's Zen in the marketplace, I think the Zen people call it. And that's the most advanced kind of Dharma. Is like Zen in the marketplace is 1,000 times better than Zen sitting on a cushion. If you can maintain this clarity and awareness of reality, even when you're thinking again. Then, I mean, once one way of looking at it is it's like if you're trying to see water as just water and not be distracted by the waves, then it's easiest to have a flat calm at first, and then you can see the water as just water. But then the trick is that once the waves start coming back again, then you're not distracted by the waves even then anymore. Once you've seen it as water and you fully realize that that's water, then you can just see it as water, even if you've got like a stormy sea going on. So that's like the next stage of wisdom after cultivating through to the mystical states. You know, learning how to still your mind through meditation, and you get the insight into reality that way. Then all the noise and commotion can come back, and if you can still maintain your balance and still be mindful and still see through that and not be distracted by it, then you're really an adept. And that's pretty much the sermon for today. Although I should say that we're sitting here in beautiful parking lot park, I think it's called. Something. we went to this really nice place and got there right before it closed, and so we just went to a little hiking trail, and we're sitting up in the mountains in northwestern South Carolina, just right across from the North Carolina border, and yeah, it's very nice, and we'll probably be doing another one soon. And so be happy,